those of you, this is their first Bridge Club. How many first Bridge Clubbers? We got a couple. Awesome sauce, guys. Welcome aboard. I'm Catherine Haskins. I'm one of the co-founders, and to my left, which may not be for you all, it could be somebody completely different, is the other co-founder, Brenda Andreessen. And you will find that this is not a webinar if this is your first one ever. This is a conversation. So we are glad you have your beverage. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is a critically important topic, and it is the state of veterinary medical education. And why are we talking about this? Because it has come up in multiple Bridge Clubs at some point, in fact, even happened on Tuesday night, and Rebecca was there, so she can attest to it, where someone says, well, shouldn't the education system take care of that? And so we thought, you know what? Poor AAVMC gets blamed for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, Andy, shouldn't it?
Yes, it should.
So tonight's conversation is to kind of get a state of the union, if you will, from Dr. Andrew Maccabe. He is the CEO for the AAVMC, and I actually don't know what those acronym letters all stand for, so we'll let him take that off here in a moment. What is it, Brenda? What do you think it is?
Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges.
Ah, well, hey, guess who gets a gold star? It's awesome. So with that, guys, I'm going to turn this on over to Andy for our toast and to get us started. But if you have questions, you can raise your hand. We're a great group here. You can jump in or you can put it into the chat. So with that, Andy, I'm going to turn this on over to you. We're ready.
Very good. So first of all, thank you all for taking some time this evening to join me here. I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. And I'd like to have you join me in a toast to the future of veterinary medicine. The future comes from the colleges and the educators that train the next generation of veterinary medicine. And I'm very pleased to be here tonight representing them to answer your questions. So cheers to the future of veterinary medicine.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers, cheers.
So I thought I wanted to talk to you tonight about three basic things. The first one is the changing model of education in veterinary medicine. And what I'm talking about here is the shift to competency-based veterinary medical education. The second topic I want to head on is the cost of education and indebtedness of our graduates. And then finally, I want to wrap up with a discussion about diversity, the importance of diversity in veterinary medical education, and what we're doing in our colleges to change admissions practices to admit more underrepresented minorities into veterinary medicine. And as I discussed with Catherine, each of these topics has kind of a big issue, so I want to spend just a couple of minutes on the first one and then pause and maybe have a little bit of a discussion before we move on to the next one. So the first one I mentioned is the changing model of education in veterinary medicine. There is a quiet revolution going on in all of health professions education, where we're shifting away from a knowledge-based curriculum where it's simply a matter of memorizing or transmitting a lot of facts and recalling that information. We're shifting away from that model to a competency-based framework. If you want more information about this, it's pretty easy to find on our website. If you were to Google AAVMC for our association, then a space, and then CBVE for competency-based veterinary education, you'll be able to find our materials there. So competency-based education is designed with the end in mind. What is it that we want a day one ready veterinarian to be able to accomplish? And then we back up from there and design a curriculum that is prepared to deliver those competencies. The competencies then are further broken down into milestones, which can be assessed by the instructor, in a very granular sort of way. This will lead to the ability to do micro-credentialing and stacked credentialing that can then result in the ultimate degree, the way that we are organized today. In my view, the most important thing about shifting to a competency-based framework for our education system is that it opens up the ability for innovation in education. Instead of being locked into a 4-year curriculum where year 1 is all of this, year 2 we do that, year 3 and year 4, and we presume that every student, every learner is learning at the same pace and coming along. Competency-based framework allows a learner to have more control and be a stronger participant in their own education. So for instance, a student who masters a competency very quickly can move on to a different competency or gain greater depth in that topic and perhaps do some expanded research in that area. Additionally, if a student masters a series of competencies, they can move on to other topics. But maybe more importantly, if a student is taking a little bit longer, they can take their time and perhaps spend a little bit extra time on developing a competency. So that's the broad framework. Our framework includes 9 different competency domains. And I just had them up over here on my notebook that went to sleep, but here it is. So the first 3 are based around the clinical competencies that we're familiar with: clinical reasoning and decision-making, individual animal care and management, and population care and management. The next 3 are kind of related to our public health mission. So there's public health, communication and collaboration, professionalism and professional identity. And most important, I want to note here that we include a competency on financial and practice management. We know that our graduates have not been well versed in these topics before, so by identifying that as a competency that they need to achieve some level of mastery of, we're hitting that one head on. And then finally, scholarship or research and lifelong learning. So I want to pause there and see what types of questions you might have about our competency-based framework and what this means shifting from to a competency-based education framework.
So I'll jump in first, and I forgot to tell everyone this is being recorded. So if there's a challenge with that, send me a PM and I can black out your face. I want to make sure that it is being. Thanks, Brenda, for also putting that in there so that everyone knew. So one of the first things that I'm going to follow up on, and I know we've got the list of questions that people come up with, but I wasn't aware that one of the pillars is the communications and collaboration. I find that to be fascinating that there's now that kind of core competency that's being pushed out there. And 2 nights ago, and Rebecca, you will remember this in our conversation, someone brought up the need of what are we teaching in schools with regards to the role with technicians. So I'm going to jump that one ahead just because I happen to know that was a huge part of the conversation, specifically if veterinarians are having to learn some of the core skills of the practice from a technician versus vice versa if they're brand new into practice. So is that covered under the communication and collaboration section?
Yeah, in fact, those are 2 different competencies. Communication is one and collaboration is another. But you've hit on something very important, Catherine, and I really want to emphasize this. For those of you who haven't heard of it, there's an excellent book I would commend to you. It's called The Future of the Professions by Richard and David Suskind, The Future of the Professions. And what they talk about in their book is that the democratization of knowledge, meaning anybody can get access to information today, and the increased use of technology, including robotics and digital systems that can read images and things like that, the role of the professional in the future is going to change dramatically. So no longer will veterinarians or physicians or dentists be the ones that are doing the tasks. Those will be done by what they term increasingly capable systems. Those increasingly capable systems include highly trained paraprofessionals. In our case, it would be veterinary technicians and veterinary nurses. We might consider degrees that are equivalent to the physician assistant or nurse practitioner that are used in human medicine, but also highly trained lay personnel, and then automated systems. So what will be the role of the professional, in our case, the veterinarian, as others practice more at the top of their capabilities? Well, the veterinarian is going to have to be the collaborator, the one who puts it together, the team leader, and the one who is the trusted guide to the client to work them through this maze of information, this plethora of information that's available. And that's why these skills are going to become so important in the future. The fact is they're important now, and they have always been, but we're placing increased emphasis on this because what we see coming down in the future, and we need to train our veterinarians in a different way.
100% agree. So everybody please jump in, but I want to jump in with a question first here real fast. I actually have two questions. I mean, the first one is, so Andy, I love this competency-based model. I think it's brilliant, right? And what a great way to allow people to learn at their own pace. Is there anticipation that that might help also with the debt? If you have some people moving through the competency models, can they graduate earlier?
It certainly could. Now, by the way, before we get too far down the road, the idea of a competency-based time variable education is an aspiration at this stage. There is no health profession school that has been able to do that yet, but that is the aspiration. It may take us a little while. So yes, it's absolutely possible, Brenda, that a student perhaps who took some advanced placement courses in high school, who took an accelerated undergraduate program and was able to complete all their prerequisites, they might be able to master the competencies that are required to become a veterinarian in less than the prescribed 4 years that are set now. But there is a lower limit. It takes a certain amount of time to develop a professional identity, to understand the culture, the ethics, and the other professional attributes of becoming a veterinarian and being a member of the profession. And that's why that's yet another competency, professionalism and professional identity. So there is, again, a lower limit. There's also kind of an upper limit. And in other words, we recognize that even today, there are a certain number of students, about 5% or so, who take longer than 4 years. For a family reason, a health reason, for whatever reason, they might sit out a year and then graduate in 5 years instead of 4. And there's no detriment to the learning process there. We could envision maybe up to 6 or 7, but I think when you go much beyond that, then you start losing the cohesiveness of the education. So when we're talking about a time variable process, we're really talking about, instead of 4 and exactly 4 and no more and no less than 4, we're talking a range of about 3 to 6 or 7 or something like that. And that can have cost implications on both sides. One is if you get it done quickly, you can enter the job market sooner. The other one is if you choose to perhaps engage in part-time employment or a mixture of part and full-time employment, and you might be able to get through in that longer period of time without accruing so much debt.
Okay, so part 2 of my question then is, with this changing, not programming, with the changing, what do you call it when you go to college anyway? Course load, course schedule. Yes. With the change in all the courses that they are being asked to take and the competencies they're being asked to achieve here, do we think that's going to change the kind of person who chooses to become a veterinarian, because it becomes so much more engaged with collaboration and leadership and all those things we know are important? Is that going to make some of the people who really just love the medicine and surgery part of it perhaps change their mind and choose something else? I know it's all conjecture right at this point. I'm just curious to know what you think about that.
Well, I don't know about that, but I will tell you this. There's also a tremendous amount of work going on the admissions side. And how do we assess these competencies in our applicants? The fact is, it's much easier to select for some of these attributes than it is to train for them. And there's some remarkable work going on in this regard right now. Many of the schools use a technique known as the multiple mini interview to get at these behavioral events, or it's otherwise known as a situational judgment interview. But there's a new system that we've become aware of lately that was developed in Canada for the medical schools there, and is now being widely used in many of the Commonwealth countries, and in fact, several universities here in the United States, medical schools and other health profession schools. And that is a system called CASPER, C-A-S-P, all caps, and then E-R. And it gets at assessing these very skills we're looking at: communications, empathy, teamwork, leadership. All of these, what have been called soft skills. I prefer the term professional skills. This is what it takes to interact with people and build teams and work with teams. And so some of our veterinary medical schools are going to be using the CASPER online situational judgment assessment tool. And we hope to make that widely available and for that to become a best practice in admissions.
Must be fascinating to watch. I mean, wow, it's that, talk about progress right there, right? Really recognizing the kinds of skills in addition to just being a good surgeon or, you know, have a good understanding of medicine. That's fantastic. I didn't mean to hog all the question time, you guys. Those were like, I had to ask.
So opening it up for others before we jump into the ones that are in the chat, just really quick. Any questions that people are dying just on this core competency kind of category?
Brenda, you were hogging all the questions, so so we're gonna have to silence you for the rest of the call now.
I'll mute myself, Jeff.
Okay, well, Andy, quick question, and you may have said it and I missed it in the list of competencies, but where does well-being, mindfulness, self-compassion, some of those things that we're finding are critically important, in addition to the technical competencies, where does that fit in? And again, I may have missed it, so I'm sorry if I did.
No, you didn't miss it, Jeff. It's not in these competencies here. The idea of the competency-based framework is this is what is required for a graduate veterinarian to be ready to practice. I think, though, what you mentioned, and I'm just looking here to see in the professionalism and professional identity, what you've mentioned is an essential skill. There's no doubt about that. I will say that, yeah, this is more on, well, the professionalism and professional identity competency domains include the competency of reflects on personal actions.
Yeah.
Now,
self-awareness.
And then the sub-competencies include things like invites and responds to constructive feedback, critiques decision-making process and its outcomes. It's sort of aiming towards that.
Yeah.
And I think you raise a really important issue. There is no doubt that well-being has emerged as a very central component in all of our schools, and it's a high priority for us in our strategic planning. I do think that as we go through future iterations of the competency-based framework, there will be space to include that. And I appreciate that feedback very much, and I'll bring that up with our group that developed it, because I don't see that it's explicitly called out, and I think that that could improve the competency if we did that.
Yeah, thank you.
Questions before I jump into a few that are in the chat. So one of the biggest questions that comes out is we hear it from veterinarians in practice as they say they hire a new veterinarian and they're just not ready for practice. Their first year practice, they don't have the confidence, or it's just they're not prepared. How are those colleges addressing that?
Yeah, that's a huge issue. And by the way, I got to say, oh, you're recording this, aren't you? Okay. Well, I've said this before publicly, but so I'll take my hits where they come. Here's how I would describe my veterinary education, my training, which occurred 30-ish some sort of years ago. As a fourth year student in the clinics, I spent a lot of time watching an intern who watched a resident, who watched a board certified specialist do an extremely complicated procedure that I would never see in practice. That describes a lot of my time in clinics, in rotations. We convened the North American Veterinary Medical Education Collaborative in about 2009. And that was the first time we brought together a wide range of stakeholders, including, for the first time together, employers of our graduates. And we heard a lot from those employers. It's exactly the same what you're saying now. They said, your graduates are not prepared to enter practice. You have abandoned your role of training primary day one entry-level veterinarians. I refer to it, that phase, beginning in the late 1960s and moving well into the 90s, is the hijacking of the curriculum by the board certified specialists. Since that time, we've been able to support a cadre of primary care veterinary educators represented at all of our member institutions around the world. Even though our name says Association of American Veterinary Medical Colleges, we represent all 52 of the COE accredited schools around the world, including in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Asia. So this has been a consistent problem around the world. We bring together these primary care veterinary educators so that they can share best practices about how to train students to enter practice. And I would say that although the work continues, there has been a radical transformation in our schools about the emphasis on primary care and day one competencies. And I think the competency-based framework will continue to drive that process forward.
Any other comments?
Do you see the distributive model having a role in that? So moving more towards distributive based or distributive hybrid models?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good thing. Is that Micah?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that, because it gives a quick opportunity to talk about that. In fact, Western University of Health Sciences was the first school with an almost fully distributed clinical model to become accredited. Since that time, there have been now 5 or 6 with the newest schools, University of Arizona in Tucson and Long Island University, that have just will be starting their classes. They're going to follow that model as well. Here's the truth of that, though. Even the schools with the traditional teaching hospitals, they've always allowed a certain amount of time off campus. That fourth year students have always been allowed to do a little bit of time off campus. The question is how much. Here's the great value in my view. Can you hear the siren? Never mind. To me, the great value of the distributed model, again, if they're well-managed, well-supervised practices, which they are because they all have to be visited by the site visit team during accreditation, it puts students into a real-life practice environment where they learn about, perhaps at a slower pace, but they learn about the business aspect of what they're doing, as well as how to work as part of a team in a real-world setting. So I happen to be a big fan of distributed clinical education, and I think even the schools with the large teaching hospitals can benefit from adopting a certain amount of that in their programs.
So no one panic, but we have our 25 minutes. That's okay. We're now moving directly into the after party. So,
we got like 4 more topics.
I know. We even joked earlier. I'm like, watch us not even get to the other stuff.
I probably spent too much time yapping.
No, it's the good stuff. So I will, we'll come back to the 2 questions that are on here, unless you can do it quickly. And that is the notion on, people are saying that technology is changing so quickly. How are the colleges staying up to date with the new technology that is happening?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that they are, frankly. I mean, this is a really difficult thing because technology increases at an exponential rate. And what that means is it's doubling like every 2 years or so, and it's really hard to keep up with that. So here's what I think is the hedge against that. Since there is no way that we are going to know what new device, what new technique, what new thing is going to be out there even 4 years from now, let alone 40 years from now, which is the lifespan of our graduates in their careers, right? 40 years or so of practice. There is no way to know that, no way to predict it. So what we have to do is we have to take a step back or get that higher view. And Jeff, it kind of comes back to one of the things you mentioned about, first of all, we need to develop tools of resilience and adaptability, right? So that our graduates are not paralyzed by this rapidly changing environment. Secondly, we need to focus on those types of skills that we mentioned in these competencies, the communications, collaborations, and professional identity skills. Again, these other skills that allow people to adapt and be able to take on whatever changes are coming their way. And this does give me an opportunity to get into my third topic, because I got to say, and you can record this one, I feel really strongly about this. We know that diverse teams make better decisions. And by diverse, I mean every possible way of defining diversity. Race, ethnicity, age, sex, sexual identity, geographic origin, socioeconomic status, all of these things, these are identity diversity characteristics. They inform our cognitive diversity. And it's that cognitive diversity that is so important to team-based decision making. So if diverse teams make better decisions, it stands to reason that a more diverse profession will be able to withstand whatever challenges come our way, whether it be new technology, changing practice model, or payment and reimbursement models, or any new infectious diseases. It stands to reason that a more diverse profession would be able to withstand those challenges because we have more variability, more diversity, and be more adaptable. And therefore, I think the single most important thing we can do to ensure the long-term sustainability of this profession is to have a more diverse workforce. The way we do that is to have a more diverse student body. The way we do that is to have a more diverse applicant pool. And the way we do that is we have to back up to K through 12 recruitment. We have not done a good job there, and it's going to take an all of profession, a whole of profession approach, and we're going to have to work with all the other health professions in that space. That's my message, and that's the single most important thing that I think we have to work on.
So the good news is we're having a very, very in-depth conversation about this very topic, and Andy is coming back to help that. That's going to be on March 10th. We're bringing it forward, and we're going to be talking about success stories, and we're going to talk in depth about access to care and how that will feed that younger population to come forward and want to be a part of this profession. So very, very excited about that. But is there any questions on this number 3 point that should have been number 2, but it's now number 3, and we'll go to number 2 in a minute. Any comments?
I'll ask you, do you agree with me?
Yeah, I think a lot of heads were shaken.
Hands, like, yes.
So what can we do to reach young people from different types of backgrounds, the type of people that we have not traditionally had in our applicant pool? What can we do to get to them?
We need to be in those areas. We need to be where they are. So they need to see us talking positively about our profession in those areas. Because in some places they see us, but it's the stories about the crisis of our wellness and how awful it is and us not being valued. Well, that doesn't help us to recruit young people. into the profession.
I have a suggestion, and it's actually a team-based approach. Imagine that. Is that within a veterinary hospital, within a community, because that's where we thrive, encouraging veterinary technicians and veterinarians or receptions and managers or a team of people to go into those K through 12, not just on career days, but other opportunities, or even, and keeping them on the clock. That's the other piece of this pie, is that it works towards the benefit of the practice too, when a team is encouraged to participate in the 4-H meetings and be leaders in 4-H and make that work-life blend piece so that we get to follow our passions, reach more people where they are, and support our team members in driving that knowledge as to who we are, what we do, and be faces within the community, just not faces behind the door of a veterinary hospital.
Yeah, there's a program, this is like one of my, I feel pretty passionate about it, but there is a program in the pipeline. It's called This Is How We Roll, and it's an NIH-sponsored CEPA program. It started at Purdue University. They've spread it out to numerous satellite, right now it's academic institutions, but I think, and I don't think I'm misspeaking, from their idea is to really make it a balloon project, and so to bring it to practices. But the program takes a curriculum, so a curriculum was developed and it's delivered in the classroom. So we go out and we talk to K through 12 students about things. What does the career look like? What's the life cycle of a flea? What's the skull? And we make it fun and interactive for them, surgical concepts. So I think it's coming, and I think we need more of those types of programs.
Sounds fantastic.
Yeah,
Mike,
I'm familiar with that program. I just want to say, but I just love saying this because fleas can be fun. Who knew?
So Micah, are you on that program?
Yes, we're hoping to have a second grant come through, and I'm a consultant for it. I was at Purdue, so I was involved in part 1 as far as content creation, delivery, and the research aspect. So yeah.
I may ask you to come on our conversation too, because this
Yeah,
is really powerful. So Micah, expect to get an email from me after this, because I think it's powerful. I'd also love to be able to take it so that other people get exposed to it. I'm a big proponent of getting into the younger people. So
I don't mind, but I may put you in contact with somebody else who actually, but you know,
no worries. I just referred to myself that I like to work with young people, and I just realized that came out of my mouth. So like wanting to stop that real quick. No, absolutely. Absolutely. That's what the Bridge Club is all about. Let's create those different connections. Any other comments on this piece so that we can get to the kind of the really heavy one? I call it heavy because I think it's what everyone talks about. And so I'll just tee it up right now, and it's about cost. Let's go there.
Yeah, so a lot of talk about the cost of education, but really I think what people are more interested is the indebtedness of our graduates. And in fact, it's even more than that, it's the debt to income ratio. So let's talk a little bit about the cost of education. We publish all the data on tuition on our website, from the total cost of attendance for a 4-year program, including cost of living and interest on accrued debt at all of our member institutions around the world, both the resident or subsidized fee and the non-resident or unsubsidized fee. So one of our main roles is to collect the data and provide that for potential applicants who are influenced by that, so that they can have the most complete information that we have available. The facts are these. The cost of a veterinary medical education is not substantially different from the cost of a medical education. They're expensive. It takes a lot of work to train a health professional in the biological sciences. You need laboratories, you need clinics, you need all sorts of other facilities. In contrast, training a lawyer is pretty cheap. You need a lecture hall. and you don't even need video stuff because they don't give presentations, they just ask questions, right? So there's a big difference in health professions education. Secondly, the indebtedness of our graduates is not substantially different from the indebtedness of medical students. They're about the same. About $160,000, $170,000 is the mean. The big difference in our case is incomes. Veterinarians have about half the average income of veterinarians is a little bit less than half that of physicians. And so our real problem in this issue is not necessarily the cost or the indebtedness, it's more on the income side. Mm-hmm. So we need to start thinking about solutions there. We advocate very strongly for increased public support for veterinary medical education. The argument is that veterinary medicine is a global public good and it's worthy of public support. The work that veterinarians do protects the health of animals and people, and it supports the economy in a number of ways, and it is deserving of public support at the federal level or the state level. The fact is that governments at all levels have cut funding for all types of post-secondary education, and especially at the graduate and professional level. The brutal truth is I don't see that funding coming back anytime soon. So what can we do to offset that loss of public funding? The thing that our schools are most focused on right now is raising funds to establish endowments for scholarships. This is probably the single most important thing we can do to decrease the burden on the student. When I went to school, again, those 30-some years ago, about 80% of the cost of my education was subsidized by the state in the school, where the school was that I attended. And I only paid about 20%. Now, shame on the school, they didn't tell me that. They just said, here's your tuition. And I said, you gotta be kidding me, that's expensive, right? Imagine shifting that coin. Today, veterinary students are paying about 80% of their cost, and even those that are in the subsidized public seats at the public schools are only getting subsidized about 20%. And the fact is, over half of our students are either at private institutions or they're paying non-resident full fare rates at those schools. So it's much worse. And like I said, I don't see a big change in our funding priorities at the state or federal level that's gonna supplant that. So the burden is to take the burden off the students. The goal is to raise money for scholarships. We track those numbers, and we're pleased to see that many of our schools are increasing their endowments. We recognize those that have made substantial progress in this area, and there have been several that have put new emphasis on fundraising for scholarships. But frankly, this is our best way to cut down on the burden on students.
Do you find, Andy, that the cost of other degrees are catching up though with the cost of veterinary medicine? Because if you're getting a master's degree, for example, in business, you're coming out of school having spent anywhere from $80,000 to $150,000, depending upon the program you're going to, with starting salaries somewhere near $100,000. But it sounds like, with some of the data we're hearing, I don't know if this is true or not, that veterinarians are now able to graduate and get jobs that are pretty near that same amount cost-wise. Whereas I know 20, 30 years ago, it absolutely wasn't the case. But do you see that that is going to become more the norm and not so much the exception to the academic rule?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And you're right, the numbers for starting salaries for veterinarians is increasing. And by the way, the standard metric that's used across all degrees and all programs is the debt to income ratio. And by income, they mean first year income. And it's, even though we know that our graduates, most of them enter fee for service companion animal medicine, about 80% of them. And many of them go on a production incentive basis. And so after their first 6 months or a year, their salaries can increase fairly rapidly for those first couple of years. But that doesn't matter. The standard metric is that first year salary. And yes, it's encouraging that it's increasing. But what we've got to do is continue to give students information to minimize their indebtedness and to pay those, to work through their loan repayment programs, the best one that's suitable for them.
So we are coming towards the end. So now's the time to jump in with any additional questions, because we try to keep our time as limited as possible for those of you who are new to the Bridge Club. So any final questions for Andy? And by the way, Andy, this has been amazing, absolutely amazing.
Hey, Andy, do you see any help coming to students with regards to interest rates on the loans? Because loans have been high for a long time. I've graduated 16 years ago and I had pretty big loans coming out of school, but the main difference that I was seeing even in 4 or 5 years after me was not so much the amount of debt, but the interest rates that were getting charged.
Yeah.
Do you foresee?
Yeah. Well, first of all, hi, Dana. Thanks for the question. The sad truth is no. And here's kind of the, I would say, dirty little secret, but it's not secret about the federal student loan program, is that the graduate and professional loans are taxed at a high interest rate to subsidize the undergraduate loan program. It's a policy decision that Congress made many, many years ago. We have been working diligently in partnership with the AAVMA and all of the other health professions education associations to try and roll that back. So not only do graduate and professional loans accrue interest while students are still in school and ostensibly unable to make any payments, but it is at a much higher rate than the undergraduate loans. And again, it's a policy decision.
Please let me know if you do.
Education made to subsidize those other undergraduate loans. We're working at it. As a matter of fact, Congressman Schrader from Oregon, one of the 3 veterinarians in Congress, is working on introducing legislation that would put, what do I want to say, stop 0% interest for residents while they're doing their residency. The reason he's working at that angle, even though it affects a smaller percentage of our graduates, is because there are similar programs for medical residents. And so he's trying to mirror that. We can't do anything about our professional students in the 4-year curriculum. There's no movement there, but what we're trying to do is get at it where we can. We'll continue to fight for that. But I got to tell you, that is an uphill battle. But I hear you, Dana. It's a big issue. And like I said, it's not only that they're higher rates, but they charge it while you're in school and you can't. So some of our students accrue interest at around $10,000 of accrued interest while they're in school, and that adds to their burden, and then they pay interest on that. Oh, sorry, I get a little wound up about it.
It's I agree. Yeah.
A really good question. So I know we're trying to wrap up, but I think Andrew Moffat just posted a really interesting question in the chat that if you guys have a couple moments, I think we should ask Andy his opinion here. Basically, the bottom line is he believes that the best way to break free of the debt is to become an owner, a business owner. And his question was, why are we not doing more to generally promote the benefits of independent practice ownership? We talk a lot about the fact that you can get such high salaries working for a corporate practice, but what about the benefits of ownership? It's scary, but is that something, Andy, that you believe is
This sounds almost like a planted question, so I can't thank you enough for doing, because it gives me an opportunity to tell you about a really exciting program that was pioneered at the University of Georgia and has been replicated at Florida and at least 2 other institutions. And this was a business guy who got a grant from the Small Business Administration. He's not a veterinarian, but he said, what can we do to, in the small business arena, to help veterinary students learn more about practice ownership? So he developed a clinical program where he takes 4th year. Are you familiar with, you're nodding your head, Brenda. Do you know this one?
I actually, and I promise I did not plant this question. You guys can see it was in the chat.
Okay.
I actually have heard about it, and I thought it was really intriguing.
It's just brilliant. And what we're trying to do is tell all of our schools about it and hope that they can find somebody to replicate this. At any rate, takes 4th year students in a rotation, and he lines up private practices in the state. And what the practices agree to do is they say, we will let your students come to our practice for a week. We're going to open our books, all of it, including salaries and what we pay and what we do. And we're going to let you observe and just stand in the corners and watch us do our procedures and how we manage things. And then the course leader takes those students and he gets them to write up a summary of their observations and their recommendations by walking them through a clinical case. What we know about adult learning is that it's got to be experiential and it's got to be meaningful and have an impact. So imagine these students going to a real live operating practice and being put in a position of saying, now you need to analyze the books here and look at this and make recommendations about what this practice owner can do to improve efficiencies and improve their bottom line. And of course, the guy running the program, he's an MBA guy, he's can guide them and do these things. The outcomes of this are astounding. It's like the number of those graduates, well, the early outcome is they survey them. What are your interests in owning a practice before you go through this rotation and after? And it's just a dramatic increase in people's interest. What it means is they've looked at the books and they say, oh, I've got, I could do this. They get a vision of being able to do it. The longer term outcomes are not yet quite there. We don't have very many graduates of these programs, but several of them have gone on to practice ownership. So I think you're right, Brenda, or I should say Andrew, for the question. The evidence is pretty clear that people who are practice owners and have an interest or an ownership stake in their businesses or in other veterinary businesses are the highest compensated members of our profession. And so you're right, if we can drive more people to that, especially those who really do have the skills but think that they don't, that's the key group. Not everybody wants to be a practice owner, nor should they be. I mean, there's limits, but it's those that are on the edge. That's the group we got to get to.
So Andrew would love it if you could introduce him to who created that program. So if you're okay, I'll connect you and Andrew this call and let the 2 of you, because that's part of the Bridge Club as well, is to make sure that we can help advance and move things forward. So guys, we really are getting out of time. So at this point, parting shots from Andy to let us know kind of his final thoughts for us and our final toast. And then hopefully all of you have enjoyed those of you, this is your first Bridge Club, have enjoyed this experience. As you can see, it's definitely not a webinar, definitely not. And those of you who haven't been around for a while, we're so happy to see your faces. So Dr. Maccabe, I turn it to you.
Yeah, well, thank you once again for spending your Thursday evening. It's been a real pleasure and a real joy to join you here. Thanks for your interest in the topic and your questions. And so I just want to finish with talking about the deep privilege that I feel to be a member of this profession and to serve in this capacity, representing and working with some of the true angels of our profession. And that is the educators and teachers who spend their time training and preparing that next generation of veterinarians is going to carry on long after we're all gone. We're all done and gone. So cheers to the educators who carry on the tradition and create our future.
Cheers. All right. Everybody, you are free to go. And if you are an All Access member, you'll get this video. For those of you who aren't, I'll tell you how to be one in an email that I'll send you. We hope to
Thanks,
see you all
everyone.
very soon.
All right.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.